Hello, everyone, and welcome to this Automotive News Congress Conversation sponsored by Borg Warner. I'm Hannah Lutz, Director of Technology and Innovation Coverage at Automotive News, coming to you live from our studio in Detroit. Automotive News supplier reporter John Irwin is with me in studio today. Hi, John.
Hi, Hannah.
Today, we'll discuss how auto suppliers are transforming with new technology, electric vehicles, and tariffs. You can learn about the world's top auto suppliers at autonews.com/top 100 suppliers 2024. We'll be sure to put that link in the comments. Now let's welcome our panelists. Angela Johnson is in studio with us on the other side of the studio. Angela is a supplier relations analytics principal at Plante Moran. Hi, Angela.
Hello.
And joining virtually, we have Bob Lee, North American President of LG Energy Solution. Hello, Bob.
Hi, Hannah. Thank you for having me.
And Mark Granger, Vice President of Product Management for Automotive at Qualcomm Technologies. Hello, Mark.
Hey, everyone. Great to be here today.
Thanks to all of you for joining. We want the audience to be a big part of this conversation. So say hi in the chat and tell us where you're watching. We want to know all the questions you have, so please put them in those comments and we'll answer as many as we can during this live stream. So let's set the stage to understand the auto supplier landscape right now. John and Automotive News reporter Molly Boygan did a lot of reporting for our annual Top 100 Suppliers coverage. They found that suppliers' challenges go beyond tariffs and trade. Suppliers are coping with a quickly evolving market as EV demand cools, and the push towards software-defined vehicles is forcing automakers and suppliers to redefine their relationships. We'll discuss those topics and much more, so let's get into our questions. To start, Bob, we're going to start with you on this one and then open it up. We're seeing substantial shifts in the market today with changing EV policy, tariffs, and acceleration towards new technology. How have you re-strategized or repositioned your company to quickly respond to these new dynamics?
Yeah, thanks, Hannah. I think it's no question that automotive industry is going through unprecedented level of uncertainty, very dynamic environment. So it's been a challenge for suppliers as well. I would say we're doing several things to try to address, the uncertainty that we're facing. One is trying to do some scenario planning. So we do have multiple scenarios that we are evaluating depending on exactly how the USMCA negotiations go or various tariff negotiations. And finally, the IRA, portions of the big, beautiful bill that's going through the Senate right now. So we don't really know exactly how those things are going to settle. So we do have some scenario planning and we have to be flexible because we don't know exactly how that's going. Second thing, which is really critical for us, is very close communication with our customer base. I think, the relationship between OEM and tier ones have always been very important in this industry, but I think never more important than now, because with the long investment cycles and decision cycles that we have, especially for something like batteries, you really have to work in conjunction and make sure that we're in sync so that you're optimizing the capital investments that are being made. So we're having very close communication to try to understand what our customers are going through as well. And I would say that level of discussion is, much more intense and specific maybe than it had been in the past. So that's a really critical element. I would say the last thing, we're really focused on is sometimes when there's so many things that are swirling about you that you cannot control, you can get a little bit out of sorts with that. But we are trying to focus on what we can control, right? So we're going back to basics. And in our case, it's really about making sure we're cost competitive with batteries. Things like safety and quality are really critical. So I think in terms of our operations, we're really trying to keep our eye on the ball, make sure that we're competitive, we're ramping up with quality, with safety, because regardless of what scenarios plays out in, what I mentioned earlier, those basic capabilities are only going to be helpful. So, we're redoubling our efforts on our cost competitiveness as well.
Great examples. Thank you. Mark, anything to add from Qualcomm's perspective?
Well, I think, Bob mentioned unprecedented change, and I think that's been the story the last, 3-4 years, where the rate and pace of change is just amazing, right? So, in addition to all the elements that Bob talked about in terms of the, tariffs and all of this sort of thing, there's also just continuing to push the envelope in terms of technology, trying to anticipate how in our case, the electrical vehicle architectures of the future are going to evolve, and shooting in that direction, right? Because obviously, as a semiconductor supplier, there's time to architect and design that chip before it ever gets to market, and we need to make sure we're right on where the market's headed. So, really, you know, very challenging, but also, frankly, very exciting times where you just see, you know, can be massive change in just a short period, meaning 3 to 6 months, as opposed to some years ago you'd talk about 3 to 4 years, right? So
Yeah, we talk a lot about automakers' vehicle product development cycle, but I feel like we don't hear as much about the development time for a chip. It's not as quick as maybe some people think. That's an important thing to bring up. Angela, what about from your perspective? I mean, you look at the supplier landscape as a whole. How are you seeing suppliers sort of reposition themselves or re-strategize in this market?
I think we see a lot of the things that Bob and Mark just mentioned. Suppliers are buckling down across the board on their own cost effectiveness. So they're zeroing in where the relationships are driving unintended costs and how they manage those costs. They're also relying on an increased level of communication and better communication to help them navigate this uncertainty. The transformation comes with natural uncertainty. If communication is poor, that only complicates the matters. It leads the scenario planning that Bob was mentioning to be more complex and more ambiguous.
Angela, following up on that, we've been talking a lot for years about how automakers and suppliers both want more communication, more transparency in their planning. How open are automakers? How open have they been about their EV and technology plans, especially as they've been shifting so much lately?
I think you see a little bit of a mixed bag. And part of that has to do with a good dose of protectionism, maybe is the word. If the OEMs themselves are still certainly trying to lay out their plans, adjust their plans on the fly, it does introduce a bit of hesitation on what you are going to go forward to your supply base to communicate if tomorrow might bring a different direction. So what suppliers may perceive as a lack of communication behind the walls is likely trying to ensure that the best information and the most stable information is getting to the supply base in the first place. And definitely the level of communication depends on trust. So the more trust between the two partners, the more willing the OEMs are going to be able to share their plans. Unfortunately, all of them have had cases where sharing has resulted in perhaps a leak outside of the realm that it was intended, which causes consequential damage to the OEM and to the supplier.
Maybe one thing I'd like to add to that is that I do think the major OEMs have been much more transparent and trying to communicate. They've had town hall meetings, they've invited to supply days and things like this. So I think in general, they understand that there's a lot of uncertainty, and they're also trying to communicate better with the supply base. Having said that, though, I think the uncertainty that I spoke of, OEMs are facing that themselves, right? In terms of where they're going to produce what vehicles when, and those are all things that they're also trying to run scenarios. And so I think they're also trying to work through what their specific plans are, and it's difficult for them. So I actually think the effort has been quite positive, but again, they themselves are going through some of these decisions, and until it gets settled, right, they're not able to give clear guidance to suppliers, and I think we're in a little bit of that mode as well.
Okay, yes, that's a great point. Just uncertainty all around in the industry. Semiconductor suppliers and even battery makers are, I would say, relatively new to our list of top suppliers, which we published on June 23rd. How do you see your relative roles and positions in the industry developing over time? Mark, we can start with you.
Are you able to see me and hear me still?
Yes, we can hear you. We're working on
Okay.
a recording issue,
Well,
but we can hear you and see you.
okay. I'm sorry. I got distracted by that. Just your question again,
Sure.
Anna?
So we noticed that chip makers and even battery makers are relatively new to our list of top suppliers. How do you see those roles for, in your case, the semiconductor suppliers? How do you see that role and position in the auto industry developing over time, over the next several years at least?
Well, I think maybe I'll just rewind, maybe 7 to 10 years ago, right? You typically had a very, very structured OEM specifies, I want this sort of functionality in an ECU. Tier one goes off and architects it, makes a selection of a semiconductor, everything else, and then goes to a sourcing thing on the semiconductor side, right? What we see more and more and more every day is a much tighter relationship between OEMs and technology providers. Well ahead of when, let's say, an official ECU is necessarily commissioned and kicked off, but really understand where are we going with technology? Where are they going? Back to my comment about chip development timelines and whatnot, super important to get feedback from some of the leading OEMs to influence how we're going about. And of course, the reciprocal is good for them because when they give us some of that insight, we can really, have a hopefully slam dunk when it comes to the chipsets that we come out. So I think that I see that as continuing to go on, such that it's really sort of a triangle between tier one semiconductor suppliers, OEMs, and of course there are many OEMs out there in the world that are trying new and different supply chain models, right? And that's certainly something that we see various people trying to either take on more or delineate the work slightly differently. And so it's another area of change in the industry where not only is, EVs versus ICE, SDVs, centralized computing, distributed computing, but, all of this comes together. And so it makes it very important for the technology companies to have this very tight relationship with OEMs.
Yeah, and we've seen that with the coverage and notes on tariffs. Also, John has covered a lot about the cost increase that suppliers are facing and that automakers are facing. So, are the tier one and tier two suppliers, are they absorbing those tariff costs, or are they passing them on to up the chain to suppliers or other? I'm sorry, to automakers or other suppliers. Bob, you want to start with that one?
Yeah, so I want to address your earlier comment
Sure.
just quickly. Just want to mention that for batteries, it is a critically important component in a vehicle, especially EVs, just in portion of the value add that it occupies. So I think it is a critically important strategic item. There are long development cycles, so it's not something that you can build for next year. It really requires multiple years of planning. And I also mentioned that it's a high capital investment activity. So when you put those three things together, we expect to be very important partners with OEMs. And I think if you look at the battery space, the fact that there are so many joint ventures really speaks to that point. I mean, we have several joint ventures with OEMs, but some of our competitors do as well. So I think in the battery ecosystem, that collaboration is really necessary to the extent that in many cases a joint venture is a right model, right? So I expect that level of collaboration to continue. I think one additional element is we're working jointly to bring more affordable EVs to the market. Right? We understand that we have a big part to play, and I think our OEM partners recognize that as well. So a lot of the development that we're doing for new types of chemistries, new types of formats, there are joint development efforts with in some cases 3-4 year time horizons. So there's a lot more strategic collaboration at the technology level as well. So I wanted to just mention that in our case we see ourselves as a critical partner, and the collaboration to be really important with OEMs going forward. Just in terms of your second question on tariffs and who is absorbing that. So I think it's a little early to tell exactly who's absorbing it, but I think there is a lot of discussions going on right now to fully understand what the implications are, because all of the reciprocal tariffs, the steel and aluminum tariffs, the successor of USMCA, these are all critical pieces. And again, not all of that has been completely settled, so we don't know exactly what the tariff regime will look like. I do think the industry is working very hard to try to find the most efficient path to the consumer, so that the consumers can have do not get impacted, because all of us do not want the market itself to shrink, right? So I think there's serious discussions underway already in terms of how some of the additional costs in the ecosystem will be absorbed. I would say that that's in discussion, and I would assume it'll be some combination of all of the players in the value chain and the OEM and even the consumer. That I would expect it to be somewhat of a distributed model in the end. But I think people are waiting for exactly what the ground rules are, so that we can figure out what the quantification of the impacts are as well.
Angela, what have you heard about?
I
Sorry, Mark. Go ahead, and then we'll go to Angela.
I was just going to say I'd echo what Bob was sharing there, right? I mean, very important subject for the industry, and everyone's really trying to understand where are those ground rules, where will all this land, right? And work throughout the whole supply chain, so that we can hopefully continue to deliver great products to the end consumer at an affordable price.
Angela, what are you hearing about the tariff impact sort of across the board with suppliers?
And I think it builds on our earlier conversation. It comes back to communication. So what are the plans? What are the rules as they're evolving? I see in our data a large intent from the supply base to collaboratively work with the customers. You don't hear a lot of, let's throw this over the wall and cover all the tariffs for me. Rather, most suppliers are looking for what they perceive to be equitable cost sharing across the board. They want both parties to succeed, and they want the industry to grow.
Bob, maybe we can go with you first on this one. Given all the changes afoot in the industry and everything we're talking about here with EVs and tariffs, what area of your business are you investing most in over the next 3 to 5 years? Is there a particularly safe bet that you see right now?
I'm not sure if there are any safe bets, but I would say that, of course, we are looking at where we think it makes the most sense to focus on. So I would say a couple of areas where we are cautiously optimistic or focused on is one is on the ESS market space. So we make batteries, and our primary application is for automotive EVs and extended range and so on. But we've also found that with grid storage becoming a critical area, data centers to support all of the AI applications, also a critical area. And all of those major infrastructure investments require battery backup. And so that's turning out to be a interesting growth area for us. On the automotive side, I would say that right now, most of the discussions we're having with our customers is on how to drive down costs, right? 10 years ago, much of the discussion we had with our customers were on how to improve energy density of NMC cells so that you can have more powerful batteries, increase range, and really drive up performance. But now I would say the discussion is really about lowering nickel content in batteries, which is a cost driver. GM and Ford recently announced LMR chemistry, which is a manganese-rich chemistry, which reduces the cobalt content. So again, that's a cost driver element. We're focused on something we're calling dry coating, where we're putting the electrode onto the copper foil or aluminum foil in a dry method instead of a wet method. That has a huge impact on energy costs, because when you coat wet electrode, then you have to dry that out through an oven, which requires a lot of energy. So most of those ideas are really focused on trying to get more affordable, cost-effective batteries, in the next 3 to 5 year time frame. And that's almost, not everything that we're focused on, but that's definitely the most critical aspect of our investment and development right now, to try to get to affordable products that will help our customers put affordable vehicles on the market, which I think is part of what's going to allow it to grow faster than what we've experienced over the last year.
And Mark, how about you? Over the next 3 to 5 years, what areas of the business is Qualcomm most investing into?
Well, I think, if I just step back for a moment for those that may not know where Qualcomm fits in the automotive space, right? So we have what we call our digital chassis. There's connectivity, which you would, of course, expect from Qualcomm, modems, Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, and whatnot. So continue to invest, bring the 5G, eventually 6G into the space. Cockpit, which is what I live and breathe day in and day out, is all the interior cabin computing. And with the advent of AI, it's just going to explode over the next couple of years, the amount of processing power. And we believe we're well positioned to deliver that with things like our Snapdragon Cockpit Elite devices, and then ADAS and autonomy, right? So this is an area that we continue to invest in and look forward to some great growth over the next several years. The other element is our connected services platform, so-called Car to Cloud, where we're working to help OEMs bring great new services to their end OEMs, and as well innovate and collaborate in places like even LG Energy Solutions. We had announced some collaboration utilizing some of our connected services and tying into our overall platform with their battery technology and algorithms. So that gives you sort of a synopsis of those four main areas where we really look to invest over the next several years.
We have a few questions from the audience, so please keep them coming. I'll ask two. They're both about tariffs. Then I'll pass it over to John to ask about software and EVs. The first question from Jimmy Begin. With the tariffs driving China to limit supplies of rare earths to the U.S., what are you seeing in terms of homegrown mining or processing developments? So we can start with Bob on that one, and then I'd like to expand it across the industry. What are you seeing bubble up in terms of U.S. development or manufacturing in general? So Bob, let's start with you.
Yeah, maybe I'll address the ecosystem regarding batteries a little bit more specifically. The rare earth metals, I think, actually goes more into motors than the batteries themselves, but I think it's a related point. So as far as batteries, we are trying to develop a local ecosystem. So cathode suppliers, anode suppliers, copper foil, all of the key value-added components that go into batteries. Yes, we're very much interested in trying to develop those suppliers in the North American region. It is really more about the processing than the mining, I think, because even now, if you look at the actual key materials that go into batteries, a lot of that is processed in China, but it's actually not mined in China, right? It's mined in places like Chile or Africa or Australia and other places. So for us, I think we can do the same here in North America, but we also have to be pretty smart in terms of which of those materials are really strategic, critical, things that we need to produce and defend ourselves, and other elements where maybe it's okay to source because it's commoditized, or we might not have the natural resources here that's going to give us competitive advantage. So I think there is some strategic thinking that is required, but we're very committed to trying to build an ecosystem here. We invited and actually encouraged one of our major cathode suppliers to start producing in North America. So they've invested in a plant in Tennessee, LG Chemical. I believe that's the first cathode materials plant that's been announced here in North America. Some of that investment, to be fair, has slowed down just because the EV market has slowed down a bit, and so it's going to take a little bit longer for those companies to be able to make large capital investments. But we agree with some of the I guess the principles of the IRA in terms of trying to have more localized value add. We're clearly supporting that. I should mention, we have 8 plants in North America ourselves. We have 7 in the US. So we ourselves are very committed to making sure that batteries are being produced here in the US. And that required, billions of dollars of investment. Now we are moving toward, our partners and trying to move, bring them on board. So, it's a critical element. We expect to meet IRA guidelines. So what the government laid out in terms of trying to increase the local content, I think we're working very hard, and we expect to be compliant. And so we're working very hard, and we believe that there's going to have to be a substantial ecosystem here in the U.S. for us to be competitive.
Okay. Angela, I mean, there are so many parts and components that have traditionally come from outside of the U.S. Are you seeing suppliers able to, or seeing suppliers like have a roadmap for sourcing them from the U.S. in the near term?
If they don't already have one, they're definitely working on one. So we see a lot of suppliers that are currently evaluating their manufacturing footprints. They're reevaluating the business cases to get there. From a relationship standpoint, as a researcher, this is a really interesting road we're going to take the next 5 years, because when you think about it, a lot of suppliers have very established relationships with their supply base. We are upending that. It's new partners, it's new people working together, it's shifting power dynamics, and it's potentially new cultural interactions that need to be worked through, smoothed through, to find that place of harmony that a lot of longstanding relationships have achieved.
Angela, I want to stick with you for a second. Among many of the other changes that we're seeing in the industry is this continued push for software-defined vehicles and the continued growing importance of software in the auto industry. How is collaboration between automakers and suppliers maybe different for software-defined vehicles than for traditional automotive tech and products? And how can or should automakers and suppliers be thinking about that?
Yeah, what my research has shown, I think Mark alluded to it earlier, is really this introduction, this path to ADAS to EV, software is defined, is driving an entire new supply chain model. It's not just that we have new suppliers coming in and OEMs are going to work with them. They have to redefine how they're going to work with them. A lot of the traditional tier 1 auto suppliers have been in the business a long time. There are defined power dynamics between the two. There are assumptions, there are understandings. None of that exists. Additionally, the auto industry is coming in. They're no longer perhaps the big dog when it comes to that supplier's list of customers. And that frankly changes the way the OEMs have to think about their business plans, their forecasting techniques, not only the length of their forecast, but the accuracy of their forecast. It is upending the entire relationship model, and it's going to be an evolution in progress as both sides of the party learn how to work well together.
How long does that usually take, Angela, to establish a strong relationship?
Wow, that's a great question. Cultural changes take a long, long time. Relationships themselves, complex relationships, can take years to develop. Frankly, it depends on the peers involved. Relations are highly sensitive on those peer-to-peer connections, all the way from the CEOs down to the buyers and the working level. If those peer connections click right away, if it's aided by cultural similarity, they're going to evolve more rapidly.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, this is a little bit outside of my direct lane because we're focused more on the EVs. But I would say that there are some really exciting things happening in the auto industry right now. Tesla just launched the robo taxi service in Arizona. Of course, that didn't go smoothly as possible, but I think that's an exciting moment. I think Waymo, the fact that they've had a very successful launch of robo taxi is really important. And I just wanted to address this because I think it's interesting that Waymo has announced a partnership with Toyota, right? So this is a potential relationship of, someone who's developing the leading automated driving system with the number one automaker in the world. And I think this is also an area where, there's going to have to be more collaboration and co-development as well. I mean, I mentioned on the battery side that there's a lot more integration, but I think also, as you develop these type of automated driving systems and you integrate it into a vehicle, it's clearly going to require a lot of collaboration. So I don't know exactly how things are going to shake out, but I do think some of these technologies are very exciting, and you're going to have lots of different interesting relationships as they come to market.
Yeah. I mean, I think, for sure, you can look at SDV. You can also look at, the introduction several years ago of, EV mandates and whatnot, which have kind of cooled off, right? But when everyone was going off and realizing, okay, I need to come up with an EV platform, it opened up the opportunity to rethink the electrical architectures and the software architectures in the vehicle. I think that sort of has paved the way towards SDVs, right? And SDVs, I wouldn't, just link with ADAS and autonomy, but really the overall compute in the vehicle for both the interior cabin as well as the ADAS. And I fully agree. Angela, I think, made the comment of, new suppliers, new relationships, also new working models, right? I think you do see many OEMs stepping up to really, control their fate in the SDV land. And so I think that ultimately redefines, how everyone works together, right? And I think that's an area where we at Qualcomm definitely like to leverage, not just the silicon platform, but all of the software and the enablers so that we can enable this coming revolution of SDV. So.
We're running out of time, but we do have a couple more questions if you're able to stick with us for a few more minutes. The next one, artificial intelligence is something we read about all the time, talk about. We have a special report on Monday coming out about AI. How are your companies using AI? Angela, let's start with a broad view of suppliers, and if you have a way that you're using it at Plante Moran internally also.
I'm sorry, Hannah, could you repeat that question?
Sure. How are you using AI, or the suppliers you work with, how are they using it?
That's an interesting question as well. I think you see different levels of engagement with suppliers based on how far along they are in growing their organizational talent for in-house development versus external development. The starting point where you tend to see is, hey, we're using AI we're using Copilot, we're using AI to help us with administrative tasks or to help us clean up processes or chatbots. We see a lot of that type of foundational activity across the board. And I'm talking outside of technology. Obviously, the AI use inside the vehicle and the technology development is quite differently. But how are they using it to drive their processes, to interpret data, for relationships be more efficient is just starting to be uncovered. A lot of relational impact comes from inefficiencies that the partners cause each other, errors in information, not sharing the right information the first time, incomplete specifications, those things. I believe AI has a lot of potential to smooth those through.
Yeah, that's an interesting use case. Mark, what about for Qualcomm?
I think, from an internal process perspective, we're continuing to find applications for AI in many different things, whether it be chip design, whether it be functional safety infusion in your software, for instance, right? leveraging AI to help you with those tasks. But you know, to me, really the big thing to talk about is the how we're enabling the AI in the vehicle, so that we can get to, for instance, when you think of your in-cabin experience, the nirvana of having this computer, which is your friend in the car. And you suddenly, I say this a lot, but it becomes like Kit and David Hasselhoff in Knight Rider, where, if you think about that, of course, the technology seems dated from the LCDs and whatnot nowadays, but in reality, they had a very human interaction and relationship, right? And I think with some of the advancements in AI, everyone talks about LLMs, large language models, but also LVMs, and bringing multimodal, vision and speech and text all into a model, and then just really bringing new experiences like you've never seen before, right? And that's really exciting.
Bob, what about from your perspective?
Yeah, so I mean, we're using different elements of AI for various activities around the company. I would say the most critical part that we are really diving in fully is around quality control and manufacturing optimization. So in terms of battery production, there are literally hundreds, if not thousands, of sensors that really track all the different aspects of the manufacturing process. One thing I tell people is, batteries is a manufactured product, but it's almost like making wine as well. Things like humidity, air temperature, has a big impact. So we keep track of all of these different parameters. And based on that information, we can look at the data and see, where do you need to do preventative maintenance? Where do you need to change parameters? Where do you need to do various different optimizations on your manufacturing process? That's really critical for us, improving our yield and, again, getting to a more competitive, cost-effective product. So I would say that's the heaviest use of AI for us at the moment. I mean, there's things on the side, but in terms of just making sure that our manufacturing process has control, we're using all of the data, all of the information that we're collecting from our sensors, and making our decisions going forward. That's really the critical application for the moment for us.
Okay, John, do you have one more question?
Yeah. Again, talking about all these changes, it definitely seems like over the last several years, there's been, more of a, not a wall, but maybe, more clearly defined boundaries between different regions throughout the world, whether it's in terms of policy, consumer preference, et cetera. How do regional differences, in the US versus Europe versus China, how do they affect how you allocate R&D or production resources? How are you thinking about that? Maybe Bob, we can start with you.
Yeah, we have a footprint in North America, as I mentioned, but we do have pretty large footprints in Europe and Asia as well. And we're working with most of the leading OEM companies in developing various programs. Probably, you might have some regional focused programs increasingly going forward, just because the emission regulations and consumer preferences and the infrastructure is a little different across different regions. But we really follow our customers' lead on that, and depend on them to identify what they think is the ideal product for the markets that we're operating in. But yeah, we've definitely found that even going back a few years ago, not just the moment, but there were some regional differences between Europe and North America and China, and that basically means we have to remain flexible and have some manufacturing capabilities that can cut across different chemistries at different formats. And as a supplier, might be a little bit more challenging because you have to support multiple formats, but it's something that we're somewhat familiar with, and we're working across different regions with each of the customers.
So Mark, how are you thinking about that?
Well, I mean, clearly, and going back to the AI topic, right? I'd say that across the different regions, it's not a matter of if a particular region will use AI, but it's sort of the rate at which they will utilize AI. Partly that's coming from consumer preference, but I think it's also partly due to consumer inexperience in certain cases with what AI can really do. So, for us, it's really about having a scalable roadmap and solution, right? So that the trailblazers, especially in China, but also in other areas of the world, have the processing power that they need. But then we can also scale that down so that everyone can have the right, capabilities, performance, and price points that they need to hit their regional, vehicle targets, right? So,
And then Angela, how are you seeing these regional differences affecting the relationships between automakers and suppliers?
I was a bit surprised in this year's Working Relations Index on the amount of feedback received on global versus regional requirements. I don't think I've seen that before. And it was in the data tying back to these cost impacts of the transformation. Because when you think about it, global specs have a simplicity to them. They have less cost to implement one spec continuously across all clients and customers. But from the supply base, there was a desire to see more regionalization into the requirements to not over engineer were not required as a means to perform better from cost effective, capital costs invested, as well as process intensity and the manufacturing operations cost.
Great. Well, that's a good point to end on. That'll do it for us today. Keep following autonews.com for the latest on suppliers, and we hope to see you in September at Automotive News Congress, where you will hear more great conversations like this one. Confirmed keynote speakers include General Motors Chair and CEO Mary Barra and Hyundai Motor Group Executive Chair Yusin Chung. And Bob Lee will join us for a panel on EV investment. You can buy your tickets at autonewsevents.com. Thanks again to Borg Warner for supporting this session, and to our Congress Conversations production team, Rudy Shork, Tiara Riddick, and Terry Kozdrasky. And another thank you to our panelists, Bob Lee, Mark Granger, and Angela Johnson. What a great conversation today. Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you to the audience for tuning in and for the questions. For John Irwin and the rest of the Automotive News team, I'm Hannah Lutz, and we'll see you next time.